Shadows over Europe. The rise of the Axis war machine. Europe, once a mosaic of bustling cities, quiet countryside, and old-world charm, stood at the precipice of an inferno. The scars of the First World War were still etched into its soil, yet the winds carried a foreboding chill, one that whispered of iron, fire, and the relentless march of war. It began not with a scream, but with a shadow, a darkness that crept slowly across borders, carried by ambition, fanaticism, and the promise of absolute power. The gathering storm. In the early 1930s, the heart of Germany pulsed with turmoil. Economic ruin, political chaos, and national humiliation festered like an open wound. From this suffering emerged a figure who spoke not of peace, but of restoration through conquest: Adolf Hitler. His speeches echoed through packed halls, stirring the desperate into frenzy and the angry into blind devotion. Factories roared back to life, not to craft tools of progress, but weapons of destruction. The Luftwaffe, once forbidden, rose into the skies like a flock of steel ravens. The Wehrmacht trained with precision and zeal, soldiers marching in perfect unison to the beat of destiny. Meanwhile, far to the east, another empire sought to reshape the world. Imperial Japan, guided by militaristic ambition, expanded across Asia with ruthless efficiency. Its armies swept into Manchuria, then China, leaving behind cities burning and civilians fleeing in terror. Italy, under Mussolini, dreamed of reviving the glory of Rome. His black shirt legions paraded through the streets, confident, arrogant, and hungry for conquest. When the three powers signed the Pact of Steel, the world felt the temperature drop. A machine was being built, cold, metallic, and unstoppable. Too, the first blows. September 1, 1939. At dawn, German forces surged over the Polish border like a tidal wave. Explosives thundered, tanks growled across farmlands, and the sky darkened with the shadows of Stuka dive bombers. Their sirens screeched like banshees, sending civilians fleeing in hopeless panic. The Polish army fought valiantly, cavalry charging against steel behemoths, rifles raised against bombers that screamed from the heavens. But the Axis war machine was merciless. Within weeks, Poland was carved apart, its people shackled, its cities broken, its freedom crushed. Britain and France declared war, but their armies remained cautious, still haunted by memories of trench warfare. The world braced for a clash of titans, yet months passed with little but tension. They called it the phony war, a deceptive calm that masked the storm preparing to break, and break it did. Third, Blitzkrieg unleashed spring 1940. When the hammer fell, it fell with lightning speed. Germany struck west with its newly perfected strategy. Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. Tanks tore through forests. Infantry followed on motorcycles and armored carriers, and aircraft strafed roads, bridges, and convoys. Denmark and Norway fell before the world realized what was happening. But France-proud, battle-hardened France stood defiant behind the Maginot Line. Hitler simply went around it. German divisions pushed through the Ardennes, terrain the Allies dismissed as impassable. When their forces emerged like phantoms, France's defenses crumbled. Paris, the city of light, trembled as refugees flooded its streets. Soldiers fought desperate battles, but the enemy moved like a machine, coordinated, relentless, and impossibly swift. By June, France had collapsed. The Eiffel Tower cast its shadow over German troops marching triumphantly through the city. Europe shuddered. The Isles stand alone. Only one nation still stood between the Axis and total domination of Europe: Britain. Winston Churchill, newly appointed Prime Minister, addressed his people with gravity and fire. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender." The Luftwaffe soared across the English Channel, beginning the Battle of Britain. Day after day, squadrons of Spitfires and Hurricanes scrambled into the air, roaring into dogfights that painted streaks of smoke across the sky. Pilots, many barely in their 20s, fought until their fuel ran dry or their wings were riddled with bullets. Radar stations hummed, factories worked day and night, and the British spirit hardened like steel under flame. Hitler expected an easy victory. He was wrong. The RAF held the skies. Cities still burned from nightly bombings, but Britain refused to bow. For the first time, the Axis war machine stalled. The Axis expands. Though thwarted in Britain, Germany turned its gaze elsewhere. North Africa became a battleground of sand and steel. Italian forces struggled against British resistance until the master tactician Erwin Rommel the Desert Fox arrived with armored divisions. His tanks swept across dunes like predators, striking with precision and vanishing before the enemy could respond. In the Balkans, the Axis crushed resistance after resistance. Yugoslavia falling beneath storms of bombs, Greece overwhelmed by coordinated assaults. Europe was becoming a fortress of tyranny. But the greatest gamble was yet to come. VI. Operation Barbarossa, the War of Giants, June 22, 1941. At dawn, the eastern horizon blazed with artillery fire. 3 million German soldiers surged into the Soviet Union in the largest invasion in human history. Cities fell like dominoes. Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev. The Red Army bled but did not break. Civilians burned their crops, dismantled factories, and retreated deeper into the endless motherland. Winter approached like a silent avenger. The German war machine advanced swiftly, but with every kilometer, supply lines stretched thinner, soldiers grew wearier, and partisan fighters ambushed from forests and villages. When the snows came, they came with fury. Engines froze, guns jammed. Soldiers wrapped themselves in rags as temperatures plunged to deadly lows. And then, like a storm breaking upon a weakened shore, the Soviet counterattack erupted. Siberian troops hardened, fierce pushed the Germans back from the gates of Moscow. The Axis machine shuddered, it had reached too far. VIF. The world ignites, across the world, fires of conflict blazed. Japan, hungry for oil and dominance in the Pacific, launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Battleships burned, sailors scrambled for safety, and the harbor filled with smoke and flames. The United States, once hesitant, was now drawn into the war. The conflict was no longer a European war. It was a global struggle for survival. Factories in America thundered to life, producing tanks, aircraft, ships, more than the Axis could ever dream of matching. Convoys crossed the Atlantic under constant threat from German U-boats that prowled beneath the waves, sinking supplies with deadly efficiency. Yet slowly, surely, the tide began to turn. V8. Cracks in the machine. By 1942, the Axis machine began to falter. In North Africa, Rommel's advance stalled at El Alamein, where British forces under Montgomery pushed him back. In the Pacific, American forces dealt blow after blow to Japanese carriers in battles like Midway and Guadalcanal. But the most decisive turning point lay in the ruins of a city on the Volga, Stalingrad. The battle was apocalyptic. Buildings collapsed under continuous bombardment. Soldiers fought room to room, knife to knife, amid mountains of rubble. The winter howled with bitter cruelty, sucking life from the exhausted troops. When the Soviets encircled the German Sixth Army, the once unstoppable war machine found itself trapped. Supplies dwindled, hunger gnawed, disease spread, yet Hitler forbade surrender. In February 1943, the Sixth Army finally capitulated. Europe felt the earth shift beneath its feet. IX, the Allied surge. The Allies pushed forward with renewed strength and unity. They stormed the beaches of Sicily, then the Italian mainland. Mussolini's regime crumbled, and Italy toppled into chaos. German forces rushed in, determined to hold the peninsula, but progress slowed under brutal mountain fighting. In the air, massive bombing raids hammered German cities, factories, and infrastructure. The night skies glowed orange with fire as towns were reduced to skeletons of ash and twisted metal. And then, on June 6, 1944, the most daring assault in military history began. D-Day. Thousands of ships crossed the channel. Aircraft rained paratroopers into the darkness. On 5 beaches, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, soared Allied soldiers charged through machine gun fire, explosions turning the surf red. The cost was immense, the courage immeasurable. By day's end, a foothold was secured. The liberation of Europe had begun. X. The machine collapses. The Axis, once vast and terrifying, now staggered like a wounded colossus. On the Eastern Front, Soviet armies surged westward, reclaiming land soaked with blood. Massive tank battles thundered across plains, cities were liberated, and German forces were pushed relentlessly back. In the west, Allied armies swept through France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's final gamble failed under the weight of Allied resilience and weather that turned against the Germans. Factories could no longer keep up. Oil fields were lost. Morale plummeted. The machine that once conquered continents now sputtered and broke. By April 1945, the Allies stood at the gates of Berlin. XI. The final shadows fall. Berlin was a city of ruins. Its streets cratered, buildings gutted by fire, and civilians scrounging for food amid the rubble. Yet the remnants of the German army fought with desperate resolve. Soviet forces encircled the city. Artillery thundered day and night, shaking the earth. House by house, block by block, the Red Army advanced. In an underground bunker, Hitler faced the end of his empire. The war machine he forged now crumbled around him. In his final moments, he offered no redemption, only despair. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Axis war machine was dead. 20,000. The Dawn. After darkness. When the guns finally fell silent, Europe looked upon itself with disbelief and sorrow. Cities lay shattered. Millions were displaced. Families were torn apart. The air carried the weight of loss and the faint hope of renewal. But from the ashes, unity began to take root. Nations resolved to rebuild, not only their homes, but their ideals, forging alliances that would prevent such horrors from rising again. The shadows that once stretched across Europe were fading. The machine built for conquest had met its end, but the memory of its rise, its iron, its fury, its devastation would remain a warning for generations. Epilogue. Shadows over Europe, the rise of the Axis war machine, is more than a chronicle of armies and battles. It is a reminder of how swiftly darkness can spread when ambition outpaces humanity, and how courage, unity, and sacrifice can push back even the deepest shadows. The war machine rose. It marched, it conquered. But in the end, it was the resilience of the human spirit that prevailed.